Good afternoon. Wow. Shocked myself there. Thank you very much for turning up. I'm going to do a quick weird thing at the beginning of this presentation in a way to getting to an answer to this question about mobile learning. I'm going to give you a couple of thousand years of learning theory in 2 minutes. And then I'm going to explain why I think most of what we do in e-learning on mobiles is probably wrong. But first of all, I'm going to give you a little introduction. I'm just back from Uganda in Africa. And it was absolutely astonishing being in that context and watching people use mobile phones. Because they're $10 phones, they have a little torch in it, so if you're out in the sticks with no electricity, you've got a torch. You'll do most of your money transfer on that phone. If you've got a problem with your goat or a cow, you'll get advice from your vet. If you've got medical problems and there are no medical facilities nearby, there are increasingly bits of medical advice you can get on that phone. But the phone, interestingly, is far more important in that context than it is for us here, because it may be a lifeline in terms of work. It may be the way you get work on your mobile phone. Interestingly, there was some really good evidence presented by people from 3 different countries in Africa showing that it's leading to an increase in literacy. Why would mobile phones lead to an increase in literacy, do you think? Because every teenager in the whole world, but especially in Africa, wants to learn how to read and write texts. Every teenager wants to do that. There is an absolute imperative on young people to learn to read and write. So you have this amazing phenomenon of people actually learning to read and write without much schooling because the technology demands it. Of course, we've always had technology. In fact, the very first bit of technology came from Africa, the stone axe. The first sign that teachers actually had a role in cultural learning. Somebody had to teach people how to make these damn things. But when we look at mobile technology, and let's take the stone axe for a minute, the original mobile that you would charge around. Remember, for 1.5 million years, people had nothing but one of those things in their pocket. There's a very interesting phenomenon here. Stone axes weren't always used as axes. These stone axes were also found in Africa in the Rift Valley, but they were status objects, just like your kid might have an iPhone. And it was that one over there is a foot high. It's got a pristine edge, so it was never used as an axe. It was used as a status object. And that's a really important point with regard to mobile learning. You know, school is not cool for kids. School is not cool. And if you're trying to squeeze uncool stuff onto the mobiles, think again. Because I don't drive, I've never driven a car. And I live in Brighton, and I take the train all the time. 3 or 4 days a week into London. I have never seen anybody doing an e-learning course on a mobile phone. And I'm in the e-learning industry, and Brighton's full of e-learning companies. Never, ever seen somebody do an e-learning course. Because I think we're making several mistakes in terms of the way we look at that affordance on this medium. Because that stone axe on the left-hand side bears an uncanny resemblance to the sort of cool thing. I'm sure axes were very, very cool in the Stone Age, obviously, in the same way that mobiles are now. But we have to be careful about how we're going to use these things, or we'll be spending money but pouring it like water into the desert. Now, this is 2,500 years of learning theory. I'm sorry if you've just seen my talk previously in the main theatre. I'll rush through this really quickly. After 2,500 years in learning theory, Plato had an academy, a university, which lasted for 900 years. You can go into a university today and you'll get a lecture. You're sitting here listening to me lecture you. Nothing has changed in 2,500 years in terms of pedagogy, in terms of the way we're teaching people. Exactly the same thing after 2,500 years. Why is nothing changing? And yet this technology has come along from left to field. Of course, we've got these guys here, Muhammad, Confucius, Jesus. If you think Muhammad doesn't have any role to play in education, then you haven't been watching the news for the last month. Religion is alive and kicking in the English education system. I come from Scotland, where these 2 guys, Ignatius and Calvin, still have Protestant and Catholic schools in our country, in Scotland. Isn't that bizarre? That things from the 6th and the 1st century AD should still be having an influence in the way we teach and the way we learn? Of course, interestingly, we had the Enlightenment. Lots of interesting things happen here. A learner-centric view of the world. So we have people like Locke. Sorry, this goes back to the lecture thing. Don't worry too much about that. We don't have much time. These guys up here, Locke, Rousseau, who had 5 kids, gave them away to an orphanage at birth, so he doesn't have a great provenance in this. But at least he pointed us towards the learner being an important person in the equation. And hold that thought. What role does the learner have in mobile learning here? Because I think we're misjudging that one. Then we have this guy here who invented the blackboard, a really crap bit of technology that meant that teachers stood back for the next couple of centuries. This was about 1795. He came from Scotland. I'm ashamed of the guy. It basically meant that teachers went back here, started turning their back on learners, and this is what they did. And that's what we still do with PowerPoint, probably. A disastrous piece of technology. Technology has always been around in learning. It's just bad technology. This lectern is really teaching by preaching. The lectern came from the church, and it's in every bloody conference hall and every university lecture hall in the land, because people like hiding behind these things and being authoritative and telling you what the truth is. But that's not really what learning is. Then we have the Marxists. Don't worry too much about those. I'm not a social constructivist. Don't imagine that people sit around in rooms with their mobile phones doing e-learning courses either. They don't do them on their own, neither do they do it in groups. That would be even more boring. I can't imagine anybody even thinking that's remotely interesting. Psychoanalysis, people like Montessori, learner-orientated people. But these are the people I really want to concentrate on for this talk. These are the psychologists of learning who are interested in memory theory. And this is the stuff that we need to know if we're going to use mobile phones effectively for learning. Let me explain why. We have this guy, Ebbinghaus, a German, 1885. That was a long time ago, who basically told us that the following is science, that everything I'm going to tell you now, you will forget before lunch, and we're almost on lunch. The forgetting curve is a piece of science. We've got 120 years of research that shows if you don't take notes, you will absolutely forget everything. By 5 o'clock tonight, it will be way down here, and after a month, you will absolutely have zilch. You'll remember the fact that I'd gone to Africa and I showed a picture of an axe. That's about as much as I'm going to remember. Do we pay any attention to that piece of learning theory in training courses? No, we don't. But with mobile phones, we may have a chance of getting to people, because the way to solve that problem is through spaced practice. Boom, 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 boom. In other words, giving people not bits of the learning, but cues, a bit like the handle in the suitcase, giving them cues about the learning experience that you had, whether it was a lecture, a classroom course, any learning experience. The mobile is a powerful, personal, portable bit of equipment in their pocket. For the first time in the history of our species, you have a chance of doing spaced practice with your learners. Not delivering the whole course again, but bits of the course that shunt stuff from short to long-term memory. And that's an important distinction here, the chunking of content and this distinction. If we don't pay attention to the movement of stuff from short to long-term memory, then we'll be doing ourselves a disservice. And working memory, that little narrow window that you're all using now while you listen to me, is incredibly inefficient. Why does Ebbinghaus forgetting curve apply? Because a lot of what you're listening to now doesn't actually get shunted across to long-term memory. It's like a river flowing and it flows right past you, unless you take notes, unless you practice afterwards. That's what we're up against in learning. That's why most of what we do as L&D people is forgotten by most learners. So how do we address the problem? Well, first of all, you've got to think of the difference between semantic and episodic memory. Semantic memory is the maths, the writing, the symbolic stuff that you've got in manuals, no doubt, that if you still use those in training. Episodic memory is the sort of memory you will recall like autobiographical memory, you know, like what you had to drink and the jokes you told in a pub last night. You're sort of recalling the episodes, as it were. Two different types of memory. And you've got to be careful in terms of the use of these types of memory in reinforcement on mobiles. Very careful indeed. Because really what you want to do in mobiles is have deliberate practice. I do see people playing a lot of games on mobiles. A lot of trivial games, not necessarily learning games, but you do have a chance of doing what this guy, Ericsson, perhaps the most important person on that list, apart from Ebbinghaus, because his basic mantra is, if you don't practice, you will forget. Now, we had a guy here called Matthew Syed talking at this conference in January, and he was Britain's #1 table tennis player. #1 in Britain for 10 years. And then he said something absolutely astounding in his next sentence, which was, the next 5 best table tennis players in Britain all lived in the same 2 streets as me. Isn't that an amazing thing? Why were the top 6 table tennis players in Britain from the same 2 streets? Because they all practiced endlessly. It wasn't a matter of talent. I have no truck with talent management programs. I think the whole notion that it's about talent is a big mistake in HR and training. It's not about talent. It's about competence and training and real abilities. I think we've gone down a really big cul-de-sac on that one. So let's think about practice, the reinforcement of learning going forward. Okay? Then we have these guys here. As training people, you've probably heard of MEGR and learning objectives. And and the objectives of this course will be that really, like how to bore somebody shitless at the beginning of every single e-learning program you've ever seen. Tell them what the objectives of the course were. I mean, has nobody used the internet? If you go into the EasyJet site, you don't say, and the objectives of the EasyJet site is you'll get very cheap flights and you'll fly in an orange airplane in a pretty cramped condition. It's just stupid. And yet in e-learning programs and classroom programs and up and flip charts, we're hammering that training speak out and boring people. When the very first thing you should be doing is grabbing their attention, we deliberately turn them off. That's because of MEGR. Then we have Gagne, who also, the next guy over here, who also recommended that learning objectives be the second of his 9 steps of instruction. His other steps are equally as boring. If you made a movie or a TV program according to Gagne, television would die a death. At least we had Kolb, learn by doing, and this guy here called Bloom. There's some good stuff in there as well. Then we have Maslow, Abraham Maslow. Oh, that crap. So if you think that a coloured triangle on a screen has got much to do with L&D, then think again. I don't know anybody who teaches for a living who walks into a classroom going, oh yeah, now somebody has to have a bed, or is it a bed or is it food in the hierarchy? I'm not quite sure. It's a primitive, stupid view of human nature, and I love the way this kid has added the bottom. Well, this sort of ridicules it, but there's a certain truth here, I'd much rather forget all that crap up the top and go for the Wi-Fi. That's what this kid is saying. And that's why they love mobiles. Okay, learning styles theory, another crock of crap. We've got Fleming in the middle. We've got Bandler, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, the man who shot his girlfriend with a Colt 45 through the head. Lovely guy. If you want to go along and support NLP, do so, but don't expect me to pay for it because that's just downright wrong. The theory has no scientific validity at all, and if you look at NLP sites in the States, you'll find plenty of sites for teenage boys to hypnotize girls and have sex with them in bars. That's how evil this stuff is. It's got hypnotherapy at the basis of it, and it's wrong. Management isn't about fooling people. It's about having real competencies and being a real person with employees. And then we have Fleming, who gave us the VAK, visual, auditory, kinesthetic bollocks. You know that one? Jesus, my kids got badges at school with that on. I nearly went, I did go to the school and demanded that it get taken off. You will not stereotype my kids as visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. And what is kinesthetic? And no teacher could tell me, other than being a bit fidgety. And yet it's still floating around in L&D, this false theory. Okay, we'll move on a little bit to the real stuff that matters here, because what you really have to provide in an L&D in terms of technology is space practice, as I've said, but also good feedback. This is the bit we're missing. People like Black and Williams have explored this in some detail. And what is so often missing here, there is zero feedback. I'm not giving you any feedback about what you're listening to or not. That's why lectures are all wrong. So how are you going to provide feedback? Well, a feedback mechanism is a mobile. As I said, it's in your pocket. You've got it all the time. If you're going to find a learner, you're far more likely to find them in Facebook or through your mobile than you are in your classrooms. So let's get on with the task. Okay, so what is mobile? First of all, it's a whole load of things. It's not one thing, and there's nothing new in mobile technology. It's just an amalgam, an ensemble of other bits of technology. It's got really smart things inside it, like accelerometers and gyroscopes and all sorts of things, but it's really nothing special. And it was very interesting being in Africa, and when I was out well at Kampala in Uganda, all over the place in an area that had no electricity, I could just see these little beams of light because people were using them as torches, and that's a $10 phone. Smartphones have now hit Africa at $50, Android phones, $50 for a smartphone. This will be a real boost in terms of the way. And remember, in Africa, they never really had huge landline infrastructure, so we have a lesson to learn from there. They have leapfrogged the existing rather dull use that we in the developed world had around this, and they're doing much more interesting things with mobiles, I think. Money transfer is a good example. How many people here actually transfer money via mobile? Very few. Huge numbers of people in Africa do that. And of course, what is mobile? It's not necessarily just a mobile phone. There's all these little things here as well. I am no great fan of tablets in secondary schools, by the way. Throughout the country, we're giving secondary school kids a device that's basically a consumer device. Have you ever tried writing a long essay on a tablet? You must be mad. Have you ever tried coding on a tablet? you must be really mad, because it ain't going to work. Have you ever tried using Photoshop at the very time when young minds are meant to be using really sophisticated tools, we give them a crap piece of technology that doesn't do anything other than watching YouTube and social media. I don't get this. Affordances matter. What do these little devices do? Think seriously about what these devices do. What are they used for? Very interesting thing I found in Africa as well is, have anybody used the false ring? You know when you ring your mother twice, but you don't want to pay for the call, and she hears it and she knows it's twice? All across Africa, that's used because the tariffs are quite high. People don't want to pay the money. That's smart. That's a smart use of a mobile. I'm not too sure that doing an entire MOOC over 10 weeks is smart. It's used as a torch, camera as note taker. You've seen that one. Camera to scan in documents. As a mirror, I've seen that in the train girls' hall. I wondered what the hell it was at first when I saw this. An iPhone up there, and there's a mirror app, so you see yourself as you put your makeup on, which loads of people do in a commuter train. That's cool. Or as a doorbell even. My kids come up to my front door and phone me rather than use their key. That's amazing. But the truth of the matter is we use it for almost everything but learning. Games, entertainment, all these oddball uses, that's social media, you name it, there's loads of stuff we use it. And the reason we've got to be careful about learning on mobiles is the average episode on a mobile phone is about 7 seconds or less. It's getting smaller because nobody uses voice any longer, so it's mostly texting, WhatsApp, Snapchat, really small episodic things. That's what people use mobiles for. So why do we think we're going to deliver long courses on mobiles? It makes no sense. It's completely against the grain of its use, its normal use. Then you've got all these problems. If you really are going to do mobile learning, everybody here will be telling you, oh, it's easy, it will work on it. If anybody here says it will work on any mobile, give them a good slap. I've been involved in mobile learning for many years. It will not work on every mobile. The fact is you're playing a bit of a gambling game with the dominant operating systems, the different tiling systems on screens and so on and so forth. You've got to be really careful with all this stuff technically if you're going to do it well. And how complex is your e-learning going to be? Is it going to use social media? Is it going to be linked into your LMS? There's hundreds of really tricky technical problems. If you go down this mobile learning path, be careful. It's not as easy as you might imagine. And of course, there's loads of things you can do doing it. Are you going to have collaborative learning on your mobile phone? If you are, be careful. It's not trivial. And if I were going to do collaborative learning, I would use Facebook, WhatsApp, Snapchat, and everything else that already exists. I wouldn't set up chat rooms in my e-learning program because no person in their right mind is going to use it. The world's littered with empty forums and specialist learning chat rooms that nobody uses because we already have better bits of software on our mobile. So the lessons for mobile learning here: beware of rich media. It's still a huge effort to get bits of video down on your phone if you're on the train and you're going to a tunnel and all that jazz. Don't think it's that trivial. Short is good, 7 seconds. Action matters, doing things, the creation, sharing, but it's not easy. And don't think it's all about the delivery of content. I don't think mobile learning is about the delivery of content. I do think it's about this. I think it's about the delivery of cues, spaced practice over time to people so that you shunt knowledge from short to long-term memory. That's what mobiles should be used for, so that you get these lifts. Now, the frequency of spaced practice, don't worry too much. There's lots of models around there. Some of them are logarithmic, so you do it an hour after, a day after, 3 days after, a week. Actually, the research shows that that's not necessarily the right way to do it, but it's okay for a model. What you should be doing is, let's suppose you deliver a learning experience, a course, okay? What you've got to do is work out what the space is between the application of that knowledge. Let's say the kid has an exam in 3 weeks' time. What you do is you put your spaced practice into that 3-week slot, and you let the maths of the tool work out what the spaced practice model should be, so that you really are shunting stuff steadily but surely into long-term memory so that they walk into the exam and pass it. Now, in your world, that might be a set of competencies. It might be a new job. It might be an induction program as they go into their new role. There are all sorts of periods into which spaced practice can be popped. We have a real chance as L&D people to do something really wonderful here and get massive increases in productivity and learning if we pay attention to this bit of science and the use to which mobile phones can be used in terms of the appliance of spaced learning. Again, this is Matthew Syed, the guy I was saying, deliberate practice. When people do deliberate practice, they don't necessarily do the same thing over and over and over again. Good sportsmen, for example, always look for an incremental improvement. So when you're looking at your cued space practice, don't imagine you're just taking one multiple choice question from the course. You're always pushing people a little bit in practice to go up the competency ladder. So don't just make your cues just bits of the course. I think it's okay, little bits of video questions, that works quite satisfactorily, but make the effort to make the cues really stunningly interestingly and get some progress into the learning as well. And of course, we have other opportunities coming along on wearables. This is going to be a huge, huge market here. It's not just mobile phones. Once you have these things, if you have Google Glass, for example, you can see how space practice would be made for that damn thing. You know, you really can deliver it whenever you want, really get people's attention to what's happening in terms of going on. Now, let me describe here, I'm here on behalf of Learning Pool. That's Learning Pool stand at the back here, and honestly, go and see this thing. I think it's one of the most interesting pieces of software. If you're tired of seeing the same old e-learning programs and so on, have a try of this thing. And it's called Encore. And what it does is deliver space practice in a given slot, using cues from the course across time, straight to mobiles. And these are some examples of the cues that it delivers. And I think there's quite a nice little rubric here in terms of why you should do this. I've given the argument from the science of learning, the psychology of learning, but I think there's that simple reminding thing as well, you know, which is over and above whether it's shunted from short to long-term memory, reminding people that they should behave like this if you're doing a compliance course. I don't believe that compliance courses work by and large. I delivered oodles of training to the Royal Bank of Scotland and HBOS and Lloyd's for years. Did it have any effect? Not a jot. In fact, it made those guys worse. I say guys because they were mostly guys. It made them worse. There was no ethical behavior in those organizations. The compliance training was absolute crap tick box nonsense. If we're really going to change behavior, we should be reminding people of their ethical responsibilities at the point of sale so that they're not selling us crap PPI stuff. Perhaps we should be taking it more seriously, not less seriously. Then there's the refreshing thing. That's sort of refreshing. Not only, you know, you get a learning experience, but you want another angle in it further down with the cues. Don't think that you deliver the same old learning time and time again. Refreshing it is good. Reinforcement's the big one, though. Nobody applies knowledge unless it's embedded in long-term memory. And if you don't make the effort to push it from short to long-term memory, they will forget it, which is why Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation are another crock of shit. Because I don't really care about happy sheets. It tells me nothing about the brain or the learner. It probably tells you whether you sat on one in the front row and you happen to remember to fill it in. There's no statistical validity whatsoever. It's the wrong end of the learner. What you really have to pay attention is whether your deliverable learning has an impact in your organization, what Kirkpatrick called level 4. Nobody ever gets to level 4 because they're too busy taking the pencil marks off happy sheets, looking at level 2 pre and post assessments, which are tests of short-term memory. That's what the psychology tells us. And nobody gets to level 3. You know that. How many of you follow people around with a little checklist checking their competencies in the workplace? Really? Nobody gets to level 4, and yet level 4 matters. Let's measure, get it into long-term memory. And then, of course, we've got these clear benefits in terms of long-term retention. You're talking about long-term retention for years if you do this right, as opposed to the short-term retention for passing an exam. That's what we in LN, that's what makes us different from education. We're not in the business of giving people an assessment and feeling happy about them forgetting. We're about creating competencies and making people good in terms of performance in the workplace. And if you don't have retention, you don't have any of that, and we're kidding ourselves on. And then you've got that reach as well. Remember, everybody has one of these mobiles, and you can deliver it to the desktop as well. You do get that reach with this type of technology that you don't perhaps get with tie-ups in your LMS. Okay? So, if there's one thing in 2,500 years of learning theory that I would recommend, it would be Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. If there's one thing I would recommend as a solution to that problem, it would be, as we know, spaced practice. If there's one bit of technology I would use to deliver that, it would be mobile phones. I would say if you're going to use mobile learning, use a tool like that rather than delivering huge lumps of content that people won't use. If they're going to look at serious e-learning programs, they'll do it on their laptop, their desktop, their tablet. They won't do it on this device, no matter how much you want them to do it. It's about playing to the strengths of the devices and looking at the behavior that real users have on those devices. So if you want a shot of that, shoot over to Learning Pool in the corner, give it a go. One other thing, which is completely different, Has anybody heard of Oculus Rift? One person? Oculus Rift was bought by Facebook for $2 billion. $2 billion. If you want to try this thing on, it'll blow your mind. It's a sort of VR headset, but I've tested it with hundreds and hundreds of people. And if you don't think that's got anything to do with L&D, let me show you some real virtual reality type social care, retail training, real competence-based stuff on that. It'll be over in that other hall bit at the back there. But anyway, main lesson here today, hopefully I've tried to convince you that I've got the science on my side, I've got the solution on my side, and I've got the right bit of technology on my side. It's just a matter of applying it. Thanks very much for listening. Does anybody have any questions? Great, you're all going to be using space practice and mobiles. Does everybody agree? No, who disagrees? Great, job done. See, that was a bit of quiet reinforcement there, space practice. Did you notice that? Thanks very much for listening anyway, guys. Have a great day. Thank you.